We're really at the cutting edge.
It terrifies some people.
Technology will be an enabler.
And it really excites others.
I don't think it stops.
I'm not surprised.
That's how learning happens.
You have to. You have a moral obligation.
Can design save the world?
Yes. Would you like me to go into detail?
The True Leaders Game Changers podcast.
Look at that. You're creative.
That would be my utopia.
Melting pot of ideas.
Sounds like a great example of foresight.
Luck.
Produced by the Australian Financial Review Boss magazine in partnership with Optus Business.
Imagination is more important than knowledge.
No matter where we turn, algorithms, machine learning and technology are becoming integral to our way of life. But how exactly are those things changing our way of life? And more importantly, are they changing our life expectancy and our health? I'm Dr. Fiona McKenzie. I'm a human geographer and co-founder of the Australian Futures Project, and this is the True Leaders Game Changers podcast, where we invite 8 seriously impressive guests into the studio to tell us a bit about their work, their experiences, and how they're using technology to try and improve your life. Today we're talking health, specifically how tech is being used inside and outside the body to create health outcomes. Joining me in the studio is Sound Scouts founder Carolyn Mee and neurosurgeon Dr. Tom Oxley. Carolyn, you've been winning awards for your work as a digital disruptor since 2014. You were recognised as one of Australia's 100 Women of Influence in 2016. You've received a substantial grant from the New South Wales Medical Devices Fund for your work, and in March this year you were invited to the South by Southwest Festival in America, and to top it all off they gave you the gold medal in the Health Accelerator category. All this and your training and background is as a TV presenter and in media production, so the question is, wouldn't you rather be making podcasts like us?
That's a great question.
But
I was going to say, I think what I'm doing is bringing together the creativity that I developed in media with, I guess, an early love of science. So it's the perfect marriage of the two.
So how did you go from media to being a health tech innovator?
I ended up getting into production. And around 2010, I recognised that the digital technology was becoming more and more prevalent in what I was doing as a media producer. So I applied for a scholarship in digital media and I won that scholarship and subsequently did a year-long course. And at the end of it, my major assignment was the foundations of Sound Scouts. Part of the course was learning about serious games that have, I guess, a purpose beyond just play. And I love that idea of games being, for example, a data collection tool. And with that as a foundation, I came up with the idea of using games to check for hearing health. And that was the beginning of what has been a long journey.
And what drew you particularly to developing a program related to hearing health?
Right around the time that I had to come up with a big idea to pursue, a friend of mine actually told me about Australia's first Indigenous surgeon, Associate Professor Kelvin Kong, and I thought about the challenges that he would face in screening a whole lot of children and children in remote and rural communities. And I actually reached out to Kelvin and asked him, about the problem and what he thought about a solution like, a game to test kids' hearing. And he thought it was certainly worth pursuing and that anything that could help alleviate the major issue around hearing health in Australia was worthwhile.
Surely it already gets diagnosed though, doesn't it, in children?
No, there's a huge misconception in Australia, and one that I'm trying to bust, that if children have their hearing tested at birth, it's like a lifelong check for good hearing, and it's not. The newborn hearing screening test that, all our children do have is fabulous, but it picks up moderate to severe hearing loss. And those children are fitted with hearing aids and cochlear implants, and that's fantastic. But there's actually data from Australian Hearing that shows for every child picked up at birth with hearing loss, by the second or third year of school, twice as many kids are fitted with hearing aids. So those children are at school for 1, 2, 3 years before their hearing loss is picked up. And that's just the children principally with sensory neural or permanent loss. Conductive loss is also a huge issue. So our Indigenous children have the worst hearing health in the world. And it's a significant problem that we need to find solutions for.
And have you been surprised at how successful Sound Scouts has been?
Because of its innovative approach to hearing screening, I'm not surprised, because I think hearing screening traditionally is very boring. And we've taken the science of a hearing test and embedded it in a mobile game. So children play the game and it surreptitiously checks their hearing. So for them, it's just fun. And of course, they want to get on the iPad. They want to play the game. So it's made it easy for the testers, the parents or the teachers, to have the children engage. In terms of success, I think I'm still on the journey of getting Australia to accept, a digital health solution. And so I think we have a long way to go there.
So it sits within a medical platform, but at its essence, it's also a computer game. What has been the reaction from people within the wider medical profession? Has there been any skepticism around this technology?
There's definitely skepticism. I think you have to prove and demonstrate to people that new technologies work. Sound Scouts is very much based on and around science. It's been developed with the National Acoustic Laboratories, the research arm of Australian Hearing. So it has science at its absolute heart. We are recommended by Australian Hearing, so we have incredible credentials in that space. For the skeptics, we always offer them access to the app. I guess the greatest way to show them that it works is for them to trial it. And I think once they've trialled it, they realise how exciting it is.
We've also got Dr. Tom Oxley here with us today. He's a Melbourne-born, New York-based neurosurgeon working to physically implant technology into our brains. The two of you are both coming at health problems from vastly different angles. So I'm interested to know, Carolyn, what kind of growth you see in the use of the technology similar to what you're doing?
I'm seeing a lot and reading a lot about solutions, game-based solutions in particular, that are being adopted to address health issues. In America, particularly, they're doing some really innovative work around using serious games to correct lazy eye and the like. So I think we're really at the cutting edge in the serious game space. As data collection tools, games are absolutely fantastic, and you get high quality data that can be fed into the algorithms that you develop and give really reliable results. So I think there's a lot of potential moving forward for serious games.
So it's definitely a growing industry.
Absolutely.
And you went to South by Southwest. What were some of the ideas you saw there or heard about there?
There was a diverse range of products, and from hearing about AI and baby monitors that expectant mothers could wear 24/7 to track the development of their babies. It was inspiring, and I think it was great to be presenting at a global event and to know that you're actually kind of matching wits at a global level.
How quickly then do you see tech like this being able to change our bodies from the outside?
I'd like to hope that Australia gets their skates on in terms of adopting digital solutions. I think on a global scale, America, Europe, are certainly recognising the potential of these types of solutions. They make screening cost-effective, accessible. I hear from parents and teachers and clinicians from all parts of Australia who don't have easy access to audiologists, who are saying this is a great solution to enable me to immediately check on the child's hearing. I talked to teachers in Queensland who have told me that they can wait 9 months for a child's hearing to be assessed. So in terms of being able to deliver solutions in a timely manner at a positive price point or affordable price point, these kind of solutions are going to, be more and more accepted.
Should Australia be doing more to support innovators like you?
I definitely think Australia should be doing more. We put in a huge amount of effort to develop these solutions with, the health and well-being of Australians principally in mind. And we want to make, for me personally, I want to ensure that no children goes through school with, undetected hearing loss, because it impacts their educational outcomes and ultimately it impacts every aspect of their life. So we should definitely get more support in bringing those solutions to market.
After the break, we'll find out from Tom how close we are to having data mining tools inserted into our brains and what it feels like to be at the forefront of human-machine interface technology.
Machine learning and neural interfaces are revolutionising the future of healthcare. To discover what else is transforming the way we live, play and do business, visit Optus Business at www.changethe.game.
Tom Oxley, your company's invention, the Stentrode, is described as a brain-machine interface or a neural interface. What does that mean in layman's terms?
A neural interface connects a computer to some part of your nervous system. In our situation, it's the central nervous system and direct parts of the brain. But a neural interface is where there's some technology that is able to understand what messages are moving through a nerve or a neuron and take that out to interface with another system that might enable that person to overcome some deficit within their own nervous system. And that sort of a person might be someone who's affected by a spinal cord injury or have a disease of their nervous system like motor neuron disease. There is a huge amount of data flowing through a single brain, and for patients who are paralysed, it's a tragic concept to think that their central computing power, that is their brain, is completely isolated from the rest of their world, particularly their electronic world. So we're trying to create a bridge from brain to computer.
And so this is something that's actually getting implanted in the brain, is that right?
Yes, there are other versions of neural interfaces which require open brain surgery and get implanted directly into the brain. They are not moving very fast through regulation pathways for various reasons. Our technology we call minimally invasive because we are going into the brain, but we're not going through the skull. We're coming up into the brain via the blood vessels and the arteries and the veins that move into the brain without actually having to open up the skull to get there.
So presumably the Stentrode, it's trying to capture huge amounts of data. Can you give us an idea of how much data is needed and how complicated is it to sort that data into something useful?
That's a good question. There is obviously a huge amount of data flowing through our brain at any point in time. You might be familiar with the concept of the singularity made famous by Ray Kurzweil in his popular science book. And that posits that computer power is nowhere near, well, not yet near the computing power of the human brain. So to put things into perspective, the amount of data moving through the human brain is nowhere near what we've even been able to understand from a computing point of view. So our capacity to access that amount of data is clearly limited by the technology that we have at our disposal. So just to take a step back on what we're trying to achieve, we are trying to get enough data out of the brain that it becomes useful for a person who is unable to utilize their own nervous system to act upon messages coming out of their brain.
Now, without diving too deeply into, I guess, the jargon, what are the implications for machine learning if each brain is producing different data? How do you actually train for machine learning in that case?
Machine learning refers to algorithms that utilize multiple features or elements of a system that you can continue to incorporate into your model and therefore learn as you go. Systems for neural interfacing don't even necessarily require machine learning algorithms, and the reason for that is because the brain has its own inbuilt machine learning system. In fact, that's how machine learning systems were built. They're called neural networks. They're structurally based on how the brain itself works. And in neural interfaces, we are utilizing the capacity of the brain to undergo what's known as plasticity, or that is a reconfiguring or modulation of the structure of the brain to adopt a new function. That's the basis of learning a new language or learning a new musical instrument, is that the brain has to understand how to conduct a new set of actions. So our technology and the technology of neural interfaces utilizes the fact that brains restructure as they learn and as they go, and these neural interfaces are dependent on that change in activity in the brain.
Carolyn, what are your thoughts on this?
It's just interesting because one of the conditions that Sound Scouts picks up is called central auditory processing disorder. that's a condition where the pathways in the brain, the hearing pathways, haven't formed properly, and the brain's not able to spatialize where different sounds are coming from. So interestingly, a child can have their hearing tested in quiet, and the results will say that the child has normal hearing. But if you put that child in a noisy environment like a classroom, they won't be able to hear because they can't differentiate where the sounds are coming from. But because we have this plasticity in our brain, we can retrain the brain to be able to correct this issue. So it's, the brain is an amazing thing. And if we can pick up the problems, we can address them.
So it sounds like the brain has no trouble producing the data. It's how we actually understand and make use of the data. Would that be true?
Absolutely. I think the brain is, a many splendid thing. And I think if we, can extract the data and recognize what it means, and we have the means to, to change it and modify it, then, there's incredible scope for improvement.
Tom, in your work, have you had to think about who owns the data?
Yes, that's a good question. And yes, we're thinking about it right now. And I think privacy and security issues around Facebook and Google potentially owning data that we don't necessarily give informed consent for them to be using for monetary gain is becoming an issue. But it's another level when you're talking about personal data in regards to brain. I guess similar issues happen with epilepsy or even heart recordings, and that is that often there is data recorded out of your body and maintained on medical devices and then used, but we're probably moving into a situation where that data becomes valuable in its own right. So right now we're giving consideration to this, and the way we expect to deal about this is having upfront open conversations with patients about what their expectations are and what we intend to do with the data. But certainly we do need access to that data to continue to improve our systems.
And what are the most immediate applications for your work, Tom?
The immediate applications probably in the first instance would be in conditions like motor neuron disease. So our field is being led by a couple of groups, particularly at Stanford Brown University by Lee Hochberg's group, Dr. Henderson. These guys are putting chips into brains called Utah arrays. And the most recent publication had a patient with motor neuron disease who was no longer able to communicate, and she had lost the use of her arms and legs. And the device that she had implanted, I think over the space of several months, she was able to reconfigure the use of her motor cortex, which previously was functioning as a control system for her arms and legs, into a keyboard. And so she was typing out a question that the interviewer asked her using her direct thoughts, her brain, to spell out a response at a rate of around 8 words per minute. And this was quite a big deal in our space. They're basically setting the yardstick for how fast these systems can work. And I guess there's a race on with various groups around the world attempting to match that speed, to beat that speed, and to continue to provide communication tools for people who can't communicate or movement devices for people who can't move.
So it sounds like there are others looking at similar kinds of ideas to you. What makes yours different?
We don't enter the brain. So one of the challenges for other types of neural interfaces is that any device that's planted directly into the brain attracts an inflammatory response from the brain. And a chronic inflammatory response leads to brain scarring, and that can impact the ability of the device to record brain activity. We have avoided that problem by building our recording device onto a stent, which is placed inside a blood vessel right next to the brain but not inside the brain. And then we let that device get incorporated into the wall, it becomes part of the blood vessel wall, and begins to record from the brain locally, but without causing the problems of direct brain trauma. And beyond that, the surgery that we perform is similar to having a stent placed in your heart or in your brain. It's a day procedure which doesn't involve invasive open brain surgery.
So let's go back a few steps. You're in your mid-30s, and this seems like pretty far-reaching work for someone for your age to be doing. Have you always been interested in developing medical technology?
Yes, I went into medicine with a particular interest in neuroscience. I probably would have done neuroscience had I not gotten into medicine, and then medical school was just a wait until I could do something relating to the brain, really. And then I had an opportunity arise just as I was starting my specialisation in neurology to pursue a grant opportunity at the US Defense Agency, DARPA, which stands for Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And they really have been stimulating the field of neural interfaces back in 2012. Now there are several groups and companies who are spinning out primarily from that group who were initially funded in 2012, and I was lucky enough to win a large grant to kick off my career a few years ago, which we used to start up our laboratory in the University of Melbourne.
So getting a grant from DARPA seems like a pretty big vote of confidence. How did that feel?
It was amazing. It was really the start of everything. I was lucky. The idea that I had not been pursued by anyone else at the time. They thought it was interesting and relevant enough to pursue. And I think going on what the DARPA program manager said to me at the time, he liked the concept of a young guy just walking into DARPA with a concept. So I think partly he was funding us out of a capacity to stimulate the older guys in the group, that they were willing to give money to younger guys who were less experienced, with no experience.
And what would you have done if they'd turned you down?
Well, I had zero expectations because it was a cold call turn up. I would have probably continued on looking for other opportunities. I was looking at other labs around the States who were working in this space. So I don't know, I just would have kept annoying people until someone gave me some money.
Persistence. So at what point did you think, yes, this might actually work?
That's a good question. So DARPA funded this technology because it was blue sky. And so from the very beginning, we had an attitude that we had little to lose because it was such a out there concept. I think the point at which we thought it might actually have legs was when a group of investors in the US decided to invest a substantial amount of money into the startup company that we'd formed. And then it became obvious that we might be onto something that people were willing to invest in. And the big step for us is going to be commencing a first-in-human clinical trial. And I think if we can demonstrate, one, that it's safe, but secondly, that it actually performs a task that is useful for severely impaired patients with paralysis, then I think we might be onto something. And the other really interesting thing in this space is what's happened in the last 6 months, and that is 2 Silicon Valley billionaires coming out and committing a huge amount of money and themselves into starting companies to build brain-machine interfaces. One of them being Elon Musk, and the other one being Brian Johnson, who formed Venmo.
So would it be fair to say it's turning into a more of an industry than just a research area?
Yeah, I think it is turning into an industry, and that's been flagged by a couple of different industry-related reports now. And it seems the industry, it was coined by McKinsey and Global as robotic human augmentation industry, and that goes beyond medical because you can imagine exoskeletons will be used by humans needing to achieve greater endurance or power, military, ports, logistics, and then there are a whole range of other things you can think of, and then medicine obviously fits into it as well.
How do you weigh the pros and cons between the potential benefits this technology might bring versus the potential for it to have unintended consequences? So do you worry about that as someone at the forefront of this technology development?
I do, because my best mate is constantly at my throat about it. And I read science fiction. I read about some of the ways in which this technology can go, and there are many warning bells for us. And definitely, I think about this a lot. And with any technology that is transformative, there are always ways in which it can be used negatively. I can think of a whole range of ways in which we're moving into a world where augmentation of our neurological systems becoming, apart from the fact that we're primarily helping patients who have disability, when you start to go beyond that and consider the capacity for augmentation and the markets in the world that would likely drive an interest or a need in those desirable augmented technologies, you begin to ask deep questions about what are the impacts on our culture, what are the impacts on interpersonal communication, what are the impacts on privacy, what are the impacts on our psychological health. There's a whole range of issues that can emerge, but yeah, it's a very interesting point to consider. And on that, I think in terms of artificial intelligence, and Elon Musk has done a great job on this, but in the same way we're dealing with genetic modifications and genetic engineering, there needs to be a prospective and strong leadership in coming up with how we deal with the ethical principles and the implications of, and where we put the brakes on certain technologies and where we limit the access to it that comes with any new technology. And genetic engineering has been a good example of how to do that well.
And where does this end, or how far does it go?
Well, you'd have to ask Ray Kurzweil how far it can go.
Existential question.
It's a very existential question. I mean, I don't think it stops. I think technology continues. Technology continues until we can do all sorts of things that we never thought imaginable, and the human condition is to drive towards progress, and that will never stop. So, and there will always be a need to be stronger, better, and deal with things. And, you know, Elon Musk, although it sounds crazy, he argues that the requirement for the development of technologies that enable us to interface with electronic systems is to keep up with the impact of artificial intelligence and robotics, because we are going to have demands in our world in dealing with knowledge and information. How do we keep up with the requirement for knowledge to overcome challenges put to us that we are going to increasingly face in our world?
No, I think it's a good question we can all ponder for the day. So to wrap up, I just want to finish with our True Leaders Game Changers equivalent of a fast buzzer round, where I'll ask the same question for each of you to answer. So let's start with something easy. Name one characteristic you think has gotten you to where you are today. Carolyn?
Persistence.
Tom?
Tenacity.
Name the person who most inspires you.
Too many people. My dad, I think, has been very inspiring.
My grandfather.
What's the best thing to come out of what you do?
Finding a child who has a hearing loss that no one, not even their mother or their teacher, knew about, and knowing that you have changed their life.
Tom?
Physical freedom.
Is it lonely being a game changer?
I would say yes, it is. I'm a sole founder of my company, and you know, it would sometimes be great to have someone else to share that burden with. But that said, I'm surrounded by some amazing people. I've got an amazing team. So I think that's a yes-no answer.
Tom?
Yes, there's some loneliness. That's part of a sacrifice, but I like it that way.
One regret?
Not moving faster.
Not starting a business when I was younger.
One question you still want to answer?
I'd love to understand how to have or see evidence-based digital technology picked up faster in this country, in Australia.
Tom?
Why do we dream?
Finally, what's the most far-fetched interaction between technology and the human body you can think of that might actually happen one day?
Telepathy.
I think what you've been covering with Tom is that idea that people who can't move, actually technology enables them to move again.
Well, with that possibility inserted into all our brains, we've come to the end of what has been a pretty extraordinary look into how technology is physically changing the way we live. Thank you to my guests, Dr. Tom Oxley and Carolyn Mee, for joining me today.
Thank you.
I'm Fiona McKenzie, and this has been the True Leaders Game Changers podcast.